All right, Butters, we're here. Are you ready?
I'm scared, but I know my country needs me.
This is it, Butters. We have to be strong. We're taking down those goddamn Chinese right now.
Hey, welcome to the channel and the video. This one's going to be about the China situation, which is becoming more dire pretty much every day. I've broken it down into 10 logical segments, which are displayed in the window right now. This is not all-inclusive, but it does cover a wide range of topics. Each topic is embellished with some video clips, some documents, headlines, and various images. I'll include links in the description below for those that want to go dig a little deeper. With all that said, let's get started. Oh, by the way, I might use some profanity because I don't like communists. Let's get on with it. All right, the last section. U.S. military operations. China's exploiting the distraction. You've probably heard that before. It's absolutely true. USA is coalition building, or building a coalition. Britain is in, Australia is in, South Korea is in, excuse me, France is in, Italy is in. So most of the world will ultimately join up with us. And I'll show you a chart of the world here shortly that represents who is likely to be on China's side versus the United States. Increased and enhanced South China Sea assets. As I said earlier, we've sent a lot of assets. A major buildup in the South China Sea militarily, both in terms of our Navy as well as our Air Force. Increased activity in the Arctic Ocean. Excuse me. I think that's related to us sending a message to Russia. I don't know that for sure, but it seems reasonable that we're letting Russia know we got game. If you guys want to get involved, we got some game up here. And then China assets are likely Iran, Pakistan, Russia, potentially. I'm not so sure about Russia, actually, and North Korea. And the last point I'll make is the situation is changing every single day. I get updates every day, and there's things happening at a pace that haven't happened in the last, well, forever in the South China Sea. This is definitely a huge ramp up to what probably, hopefully, won't be a hot war, but is still going to have a major negative impact on both countries, really the world. But the intention is to drive the communists out. So, with that said, let's get through this last section, which is probably my favorite section.
Scott, the State Department has now determined that Hong Kong no longer should warrant special treatment under U.S. law. In a statement, Secretary Mike Pompeo said that no reasonable person can assert today that Hong Kong maintains a high degree of autonomy from China, given the facts on the ground. Of course, this comes after Beijing imposed national security restrictions on Hong Kong. The statement says that the U.S. does stand by the people of Hong Kong, but the big question, of course, is going to be what does this mean for the trading relationship? So the statement does not specify any detailed consequences, but President Trump has raised the possibility of sanctions on China. We understand that President Trump is meeting with New York Governor Andrew Cuomo right now, but we do expect to see him leave for Florida within the hour, so perhaps he will provide us some more detail on what the next steps might be.
Make a quick comment about a statement she made. It shows you how out of touch these people are. The big question, she says, is going to be how will this impact trade? Are you kidding me? Like, really? You think maybe the big question is how will this impact the people of Hong Kong? Maybe that should be the big question and trade should be secondary. I think the trade path is already pretty much set. We're not going to do a lot of trading with China anymore. We're going to reduce our requirements for trade with China dramatically, as is the rest of the world. China has, you could say, shot themselves in the foot, but I think they've shot themselves in the head. All right, I just wanted to make that comment. That really upset me.
Amid reignited trade tensions between the U.S. and China, the EU's position isn't always clear. Some of its leaders criticize the communist regime, but many try to protect their own economic interests at the same time. Our France correspondent sat down with the director of Paris's Economic Warfare School, who says they're playing a very dangerous game.
The Chinese city of Wuhan is not only the origin of the CCP virus, it's also a gateway for French industry. But the global pandemic has forced some French companies to rethink their business dealings with China. French car manufacturer Renault is one of them. It's adjusting its strategy in China by halting part of its production there in April. But other companies plan to continue their cooperation with the Chinese regime. Christian Harbelot, director of Paris's Economic Warfare School, says the health crisis presents a chance for French companies to consider whether or not operating inside China is a good strategic move.
These French businesses located in China seem to forget that they're under the rule of a communist dictatorship, which is a criminal regime by nature.
The rules that govern international trade were largely shaped by the US and Europe. As trade tensions again rise between the US and China, for Europe, doing business with China is also a question of politics. It's still unclear whether the EU will side with the United States and exert its own pressure over the regime. The EU's foreign policy chief Joseph Borrell told French media JDD that the EU shouldn't be naive about China. But he added in another interview that his job is to maintain a good relationship with China. According to Harbelot, this position is a very dangerous one. In a recent report published by the Economic Warfare School, Harbelot stated that because China doesn't have the military means necessary to conquer Europe, it targets the economy instead.
China tries to bring down Western countries by stealing their technology and weakening their industries.
He says European leaders are now at a crossroad.
They can choose to side with US and prevent China from subduing Western countries. Or they can choose to continue this game, where they criticize China while still trying to protect their own economic interests. This choice would be suicide, I think.
Reporting by David Vives, NTD News.
All right, the first thing I want to talk about on this set of charts is the favorability of the United States and China by country, which is the one to the right with the map of the world. Two things right off the bat about this map. Number one, this is about a little over a year old. So it's pre-pandemic, pre-Huawei, pre-college scandals, which, by the way, are happening in all of Europe as well as the United States and Canada. So this map isn't representative from that point of view. The second thing is I don't think it's accurate anyway. And I'm going to go through the reasons why. But in summary, the red represents countries that would favor China, and the blue obviously represents countries that would favor the United States. Black is mixed, whatever that means. And the gray areas are, well, exactly that, gray areas, at least to whoever created this map, which I think is, obviously ridiculous. So let's go through it at least a little bit. I want to talk about the countries that are gray that I don't believe would be gray. Australia in the bottom right-hand side of the map. I'm going to go through the big ones, not all of them individually. So Australia. I don't know about the stands. Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan's irrelevant, but I don't know which way they would go. I think that would be dependent on what Russia does. But assuming Russia got into the war, then it's possible those countries would turn red. If you go a little bit over, you'll see the Ukraine is marked red here. Black, which is, ridiculous. It was ridiculous 50 years ago. It's certainly ridiculous now. Then the other is the Scandinavian countries, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. They're all gray. I guess you could make an argument that they would be gray unless Russia got involved in the war. If that was the case, then those countries would absolutely turn blue about a half a second after they found out Russia was in the war. There may be nobody on this planet hates the Russians more than those three countries, especially Finland. Then going into Europe, you can see a lot of the European countries. Eastern European countries are gray. The reality is most of those would not be gray. They would in fact be blue. They've had their full of Russia, Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Austria, etc. Those countries are not going to remain gray. and would be shocked if they were to go red. So, and you come over here and you got to the left, or the western side of the map where the U.S. is. Above it, of course, we have Canada, which is gray. Now, Canada would not be gray. That's completely ridiculous. So, anyway, that's sum and substance. That's what this map is trying to represent. It doesn't do a real good job. There is dramatically more blue than red or gray. In this case, it looks like about a third, a little over a third of the world, almost the entire continent of Africa, would be gray. And that's just not the case. I'm not going to speak to the African countries. I don't really know for sure. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about Africa, so I'm not really sure, whether these countries would remain gray or not. I'm not sure how relevant it is for the country itself. They couldn't stop us or China if we wanted to roll through the continent. There's no way the whole continent could stop us, either of us. So I think that's about it. If you look down the bottom, there's these black countries. Turkey is black. I think that's pretty accurate. But again, the Ukraine is black. Nah, the Ukraine is blue. Venezuela is black. Nah, I think Venezuela would be red. Another one that is gray on this map that I failed to mention, which is almost comical, is Taiwan. Taiwan, which is the little dot right above the word South Korea on the right side of the map, right off the coast of China, obviously. Taiwan is pretty hardcore blue, I would think. So, anyway, enough said on that. Now moving over to the chart. It looks like a spreadsheet on the top left that's sorted by military aircraft. That's the way I did the sort. The two most important things the two most important assets, militarily speaking, would be in this kind of a war, in any war going forward, at least for the next foreseeable future, is the Navy and the Air Force. For America specifically. If you're in Europe, the Army and the artillery, that means something because you actually have borders to protect from incursion. America, it is very unlikely that any country could make it to our shores. And so Navy and Air Force are the most important assets. You could argue down the road it'll be space. And I wouldn't disagree with that. But for now, it's aircraft carriers, submarines, destroyers, corvettes, and then the whole array of fighting aircraft. So with that said, if you look at this map, and I'm not sure you guys will be able to see the numbers, depends on the size of the screen you're watching this on. But military aircraft, the United States has 14,061. Russia has about 3,200, and reality is probably a third of them don't even fly. They're used for parts. And China has 2,615. So yeah, that would be a problem for the communists, a pretty substantial problem. And then if we go over to the aircraft carriers, which are still really important, maybe the most important military asset of all of them, the United States has 11 aircraft carriers. Russia has 1. And again, I don't think that actually floats. I think that has to be tugged around. And I'm not even kidding. And then China has 2. They have one that's a World War II or just post World War II. I think it's too short it's so short that it can't land the jets. It can't take jets. The modern jets can't take off or land on it. So it's like good for helicopters, which would be really useful for them in this kind of a war. And then they have the big one that they just birthed, I don't know, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, recently. And I'm going to make a joke here because I don't really know the name, but I know it's something like Longdong. So it's a funny looking aircraft carrier. It's supposed to be state of the art. I think it's made out of paper mache, but because that's what communists do. So 11 aircraft carriers to 3, just including those 3 countries. And military aircraft 14,000 to about 6,000. Again, that doesn't include Britain or Australia or, any of the other European countries that have plenty of military assets. Doesn't include Israel. Just America on its own has enough military assets to dominate China and Russia, I would argue. People, of course, China has way more people. China and Russia have more than the United States by probably a factor of 2. It's 2 to 1, maybe a little more than that. Not sure where they don't have military. That's down the other graph, so I'll get to that in a second. So military satellites, we have 123 to Russia and China's 74 and 68 respectively. Again, it doesn't include the Israelis. It doesn't include European countries. It doesn't include Japan. Actually, it does. Japan's got 4. So, when you put the assets of America standalone, they're pretty much overwhelming. But then when you include the other assets that we could bring to bear via our relationships and a coalition, there's really no comparison. Again, this is all assuming it's not a nuclear war. If it's a nuclear war, then it doesn't really matter. Nothing matters. So enough said on that. Then I'm going to drop down to the to the bottom chart. This is a little old too, but not that old. The numbers are still pretty close. The only thing I wanted to draw attention to here is personnel, because that is not in the other chart above. So you can see, and this came out of the UK. That's why they're in the chart. They wouldn't be otherwise. China has 2.25 million personnel, total personnel, so active and inactive. The United States has 1.38, Russia has 1.24, so they probably have almost 3 times more people, right? 3.5. Yeah, basically they have 3 times more military personnel, China and Russia, than does the United States. And even if you added, a lot of the other countries in, I still don't, I don't know that we'd get to that number. But as I said earlier and still maintain, and if you read any of those books I referred to in an earlier segment, you'll see that really military personnel in the context of America versus China and or Russia is really not relevant. What matters is, naval assets and aircraft. And satellites, obviously, but I think we have plenty of satellites as well. In fact, I'd suggest we have weapons in space already. Maybe the Chinese do and the Russians do as well. Who knows? I'm not worried about the Russians, really at all. They don't have any military assets. They have no money, and the money they have, Putin steals. So, not really worried about it. So anyway, that's sum and substance. That's the oh look, so yeah, Britain has 2 aircraft carriers plus 1 in reserve, so 3. That's more than China. Submarines, it's ridiculous when you add the assets together. So enough said. It's a pretty overwhelming set of indicators when you come at this from a pure military perspective. All right, I've left a lot of time between each one of these. Australia feeling the pain. China conflict with Taiwan. China to evacuate its citizens from India. This is just a few days ago. China launched rule of fear in Hong Kong. We all know about that. China's military ships moving near the Taiwanese coast. India and China move more troops into Jammu, or the region up near Kashmir. There's Trump saying he's happy to mediate or arbitrate between India and China, which he may be able to do a good job. Xi Jinping urged to prepare for war as Beijing braces for anti-China backlash. Yeah, I'd say if we didn't have these riots in America, which I'm sure the Chinese are helping fund and organize and so on, we'd probably be dealing with China even more than we are now. And we've done a lot. Trump has done a lot, and so has the Senate in the last several months since the pandemic. But Trump's been doing it since he got in office. You can hate the guy all you want about all kinds of things, stuff he tweets and says and whatever. But there's one thing you really can't debate, and that's his handling of China. China, as he says. He knew for more than a decade that China was a problem. You got to give him credit for that at a minimum. You have to. U.S. warships enter disputed waters of South China Sea as tensions with China escalate. As I mentioned in an earlier segment, or earlier in this segment, the United States plans on running its ships through the Taiwan Straits, or the Strait of Taiwan. That's, you could almost throw a rock from China and hit the ships moving through. So that'll be a big move. They've already floated by the Spratly Islands and all the other islands in the South China Sea that are being disputed. So China can flex its muscle all at once, but it doesn't stop the United States from doing whatever it wants. And I think they're going to find that out sooner than later. So, enough said. A lot of headlines. As I said earlier in the segment, this stuff is changing literally every single day. All right, let's rip through these last four charts. The one on the bottom right, why World War III could happen in 2020. You can see down the bottom it says where World War III could break out in 2018. The point of this is not much has changed since 2018. There's still the Baltic states, the problems in the Ukraine with respect to Russia, Syria and ISIS, again with respect to Russia, and then North Korea, Taiwan, and the South China Sea. This doesn't represent, because it only happened in the last couple weeks, the skirmish between India and China in Jammu or near Kashmir. That's a major escalation point if something should happen, and it's absolutely possible it will. Above it is the disputed Spratly Islands. This just goes through and lists some resources in terms of bunkers and communications equipment, etc., and shows you the distribution around the South China Sea. There's a lot of assets there, obviously, for obvious reasons. But this gives you a pretty good overview of where they are, at least where we think they are. I think we know pretty well with satellites. And then moving to the left, the U.S. military encirclement of China. It's sort of like, why did China build a country in the middle of all of our military bases? As you can see, we pretty much surround them on three sides. Mongolia to the north, Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan to the west, to the northwest, and then Russia to the extreme north. Everything else, we have bases pretty much all the way around them. And this isn't even 100% representative, because there are assets that are not listed on any maps. And that's true for China as well. And then here down the bottom just shows you U.S. military assets in areas near or in the South China Sea. So Alaska, we have, for example, 12,383 tanks. Not really relevant in the early part or ever in a war with China. But 43 naval assets, 7,600 aerial assets or military aircraft. And then Japan, South Korea, Thailand, British Indian Ocean territories down here to the bottom left. And Australia, of course. Australia has a lot of their own assets. And Guam and the Philippines. And of course Hawaii, where we have just a huge number of big bases. So again, these are our partners. When you couple our partners with respect to all these other bases, it's a pretty overwhelming situation for China. They have to feel threatened by what's going on in the last several weeks. So enough said. Looks good for our team.
No more kissing China's ass. China's actually a free and loving country that...
I'm out.
Wait, Towley, come on, I need you!
I'm never working for a company that's regulated by a communist government.
Okay. No more selling to the Chinese.
Then say it. Say fuck the Chinese government.
Fuck the Chinese government.
I didn't hear you.
Fuck the Chinese government, there!
Well, you just got your partner back.
Hey, everybody. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications on any new content I upload. Please comment, good or bad, questions, thoughts, ideas, whatever. Hit the thumbs up or down, depending on how you feel. It feeds the algorithm. And I'll see you next time, because I am out of here.